So following up on the art of Jan van Eyck that we looked at last time, today we're going to look at the art of Albrecht Durer. So Van Eyck is born about 1390. Albrecht Durer is born about 1474-ish, one of those years. So he's coming along quite a lot later, and as we said before, is very influenced by the work of Jan van Eyck. He has traveled to the city of Ghent to look at the Ghent altarpiece. He notes Van Eyck's amazing use of detail and this glazing technique that Van Eyck pioneered, this layered, transparent glazing that makes his color so complex. Rather than just a color that you might squirt from a tube and paint flatly, he builds up layers of transparent or translucent glazes. And this makes the colors much richer. The light penetrates and then reflects back out and creates a very, very subtle color and powerful color. So he gets some very intense colors in his paintings too. And so this is a technique that he's famous for pioneering, and all of the great painters of the Renaissance and afterward owe that to Van Eyck. Not that he perhaps invented it out of thin air, but he certainly took it to a level that no one had before and popularized it. So Durer comes along, takes all of these techniques and approaches from Van Eyck, incorporates them into his own work in his own way. And so we see in Durer's work a fascination with detail too. Now Durer was trained in his father's jewelry shop. He is a jeweler's apprentice at the beginning of his training, which involves not only a lot of sketching and drawing of designs, but also very, very fine detail work in engraving the jewelry. And this suits him very well later on. So we see in his work a real occupation with scientific detail in the observations of all of these things. For instance, animals. He does paintings and studies of animals, of plants. He does his famous painting of the great patch of turf, which is basically a bunch of grass and weeds that he raises almost to a kind of an epic level. The famous painting of the wing of a roller pigeon, just the wing. And again, this starts to remind us of the sketches that we'll see later on of Leonardo da Vinci, these scientific sketches in his notebooks. So Durer's interest is much more than artistic. He has a scientific mind. And this is a shift from Van Eyck, whose levels of detail, ever-increasing levels of detail, are almost like a celebration of the created world. He wants to draw us into a contemplation of the world that takes us to a spiritual truth, the reality of the complexity and wonder of God's creation. Durer is leaning more toward being a secular humanist. He's interested in things from a scientific point of view, not for any particular reasons of trying to draw us toward philosophical truth or religious truth, any kind of spiritual dimension. In fact, you can see this in his famous self-portrait of 1500, where he presents himself in a pose that really, I think very intentionally, reminds us of Byzantine icons. By this time, a three-quarter view was sort of accepted as the best way to make a portrait. But he paints himself looking directly at the viewer from the shoulders up, and even gesturing with his hand in a way that almost makes us think of Christ, blessing or gesturing with his hand in an icon. And so it's a very sort of egotistical portrait in a way. This is not someone who's concerned with the deeply spiritual realities. Nonetheless, though, his most famous work at the time was a book of images from the Bible. And this was because this was around the year 1500. There was a lot of talk about the end of the world because it was the change of the century, right? The turn of the century. And for some reason, because it was 1500, a nice round number, people were especially kind of leaning toward panic or hysteria that the world was going to end. So Durer creates a book of woodcut prints. These are prints made from panels of wood that had been intricately carved and then inked. So this is something he could mass produce. And he makes these images of the apocalypse, the end of the world, all of these fascinating images from the book of Revelation about the death and judgment And these are fascinating sort of subjects to make art about. So this is a very compelling book. The images are very compelling, and so it's very popular. In addition to that, we see something in Durer that is something we've not seen in artists to this point, and that is that he makes sure every image that he creates is stamped with his logo, that he signs it in his famous AD that he developed there, and so that everyone knows on every painting, on every print, who did the art. This is a fairly new thing. And because he goes to those lengths to brand himself, right, and to create these mass-produced books of woodcut prints, he becomes the first internationally known artist. He's famous all over that part of the world and beyond. And he's really the first celebrity artist. And after that, the great artists do become well known. And so Durer is a big part of that. So these images, the woodcut prints, are some of his most famous works. His nature studies of animals and plants, his self-portraits, his other oil paintings, all make him a very, very influential figure in the art world in the Northern Renaissance. And so from there, next year, we will begin really looking at the Italian Renaissance, which overlaps and follows on these great developments in the Northern Renaissance. So God bless you all. I will talk to you soon with another video about glazing techniques, and that will be it for the year. So have a good rest of your week, and I will talk to you soon.